Imagine standing on stages bathed in blinding light, millions singing your words back to you, yet feeling an emptiness so profound it swallows every cheer. This isn't a fairy tale. It's the quiet truth behind the loudest songs, and today we're peeling back the layers of a journey you never saw coming. Imagine standing on stages bathed in blinding light, millions singing your words back to you, yet feeling an emptiness so profound it swallows every cheer. This isn't a fairy tale. It's the quiet truth behind the loudest songs, and today we're peeling back the layers of a journey you never saw coming. The roar of the crowd was a familiar embrace, a symphony of adoration that once fueled every fiber of his being. But lately it had become a deafening echo, a constant reminder of the chasm growing within him. Louis Capaldi, the voice that resonated with millions, found himself adrift in a sea of his own success. The tour had ended, another album had topped the charts, and the world expected always more. Yet alone in the cavernous silence of his luxurious hotel suite, the platinum records felt cold, the accolades hollow. He'd achieved everything he'd ever dreamed of, and in that realization he found not triumph, but an unsettling void. The witty banter, the self-deprecating humor that charmed audiences felt like a performance. Even when he was alone, it was a shield, a carefully constructed persona that had become indistinguishable from his true self. He craved quiet, a silence so deep it could drown out the persistent hum of expectation. It wasn't a sudden crash, more like a slow, insidious erosion of joy. Each sold-out stadium, each screaming fan, each perfectly lit interview felt like a step further away from himself. The moments of genuine connection, once the bedrock of his artistry, were now fleeting, overshadowed by the machinery of fame. He'd wake up even after hours of sleep, feeling utterly drained, a hollowness in his chest that no amount of success could fill. The pressure was a constant, invisible weight pressing down on his chest, making every breath shallow. The fear of disappointing, of failing to deliver another hit, another viral moment, became a suffocating blanket. He felt trapped, a prisoner in a gilded cage of his own, making the world demanded the lovable, self-aware, perpetually witty Louis. But the man inside was weary, yearning for simplicity. His thoughts would race at night, replaying old interviews, dissecting every joke, every candid moment, wondering if he was truly being authentic or just playing a part. The lines blurred until he could no longer tell where the public persona ended and his true self began. He longed for anonymity, for the freedom to simply exist without scrutiny, without expectation. He imagined stepping off the endless carousel of promotion, performance, and public appearances. He envisioned a place where his name meant nothing, where his face was just another face, in a crowd where his songs were just background noise. If heard at all, one restless night, he made a decision, a silent pact with himself. He would disappear, not for dramatic effect, but to simply be. No announcements, no farewell tour, just a quiet slip away from the relentless spotlight. He instructed his team to say he was taking a much-needed break to handle the inevitable speculation. He packed a single worn backpack, leaving behind the designer clothes, the expensive gadgets, the symbols of a life that felt increasingly alien. He chose a place as far removed from flashing cameras and screaming fans as possible. A remote, windswept island, a speck on the map where time seemed to slow to a crawl. The journey there was long, a series of anonymous flights and ferry rides, each one a step further into obscurity. He felt a strange lightness, a sense of shedding layers with every mile. The air on the island smelled of salt and rain, a stark contrast to the recycled air of arenas and the stale scent of endless green rooms. His first few days were a blur of nervous energy, an ingrained habit of checking his phone for news, for messages, for the world he'd left behind. But the signal was weak, almost non-existent, a benevolent curse. He found himself staring at the phone, not out of longing for connection, but out of an almost pathological need to be reachable, a habit ingrained by years of being constantly on. The silence initially was terrifying. It amplified the noise in his own head, the endless loop of self-doubt and what-ifs. He walked the rugged coastline, the waves crashing against ancient rocks, each surge a rhythmic reminder of the natural world's indifference to fame. The sheer power of the ocean, untamed and unconcerned with human trivialities, was both humbling and oddly comforting. He wasn't Louis Capaldi, chart-topping artist here. He was just a man with a heavy coat and a quiet gaze, buffeted by the elements just like the ancient stones. He rented a small, unassuming cottage, its windows overlooking the tempestuous sea. The furniture was worn, the kitchen simple, a stark departure from the polished chrome and minimalist designs he was accustomed to. The Peeling paint, the creaking floorboards, the faint scent of peat smoke. These imperfections were real, tangible. Unlike the curated perfection of his former life, he tried to write picking up his guitar. The melodies felt forced, the lyrics contrived, the raw emotion that once flowed effortlessly seemed to have dried up, replaced by a dull ache of creative paralysis. He'd strum a few chords, then stop, frustrated, the sound hollow in the quiet room. He remembered a time when music was pure joy, a cathartic release. Now it felt like a product, a commodity to be consumed. And that realization choked any nascent creativity. He felt like a well that had run dry, utterly depleted. He found solace in mundane tasks, acts of physical labor that anchored him to the present moment. Chopping firewood, the rhythmic thud of the axe, a primal sound. Brewing strong black coffee, the rich aroma filling the small cottage. Tending to a small, neglected garden in the cottage's yard, coaxing life from the stubborn soil. These simple acts, devoid of expectation or judgment, began to chip away at the layers of performance he'd built around himself. Each splinter of wood, each weed pulled from the earth, felt like a small victory against the overwhelming abstractness of his former life. He started visiting the small, solitary pub in the island's only village. It was a place where stories were whispered over pints, where faces were weathered by years of sea wind and quiet living. The conversations were about the weather, the fishing, the small dramas of island life. No one recognized him, or if they did, they pretended not to, respecting the unspoken code of anonymity. This isolated community offered he was just the new lad in the Capaldi cottage, a welcome, if quiet addition. He observed the islanders, their rhythms tied to the tides, and the seasons, a stark contrast to the relentless artificial pace of his previous existence. They moved with quiet dignity, their lives shaped by the elements, their faces etched with a resilience born of generations. He met an old fisherman named Hamish, whose eyes held the wisdom of countless sunrises and sunsets at sea. Hamish spoke little, but his silence was comforting, a presence that required nothing, asked for nothing. They'd sit for hours, sometimes just watching the rain lash against the windows, the wind howling around the eaves of the pub, sometimes discussing the shifting tides or the peculiar habits of seabirds. Hamish would puff on his pipe, a plume of fragrant smoke curling into the dim light, and offer a quiet nod of understanding when Lewis spoke, or more often, when he simply sat in silence. One evening Hamish spoke of the sea, his voice a low rumble like grinding stones smoothed by the tide. "She doesn't care about your titles or your fortunes, lad," he rumbled. "She cares about your heart, and your hands. You face her, you respect her, or she'll swallow you whole, famous or not." These words resonated deeply. Lewis had spent years chasing external validation, believing happiness lay just beyond the next milestone, the next award. Hamish's simple truth, delivered without pretense or judgment, cut through the noise of his internal anxieties. It was a fundamental reorientation. He started sketching in a battered notebook he found in the cottage, not song lyrics, but the rugged landscapes, the gnarled hands of Hamish, expertly mending a net, the quiet intensity of the islanders' faces. As they went about their daily lives, he felt a forgotten part of himself, stirring the part that observed, that felt without the pressure to immediately articulate or monetize, the part that simply created for the sake of creating. He remembered his early days, playing in small pubs, writing songs not for an audience of millions, but for himself, for the sheer joy of creation, for the raw, unadulterated release of emotion. That purity had been lost somewhere along the way, buried under the weight of expectation and the demands of a global industry. He thought about the endless interviews, the constant probing into his personal life, the analysis of every lyric, every facial expression. It was a relentless invasion, a stripping away of privacy that left him feeling exposed and vulnerable. Even while ostensibly celebrated, he had learned to deflect, to use humor as a shield, a quick wit to parry intrusive questions. But the constant performance was exhausting, a draining charade that left him feeling like a hollowed-out version of himself here on the island. He was simply Lewis, a temporary resident, a quiet observer. He felt the tension in his shoulders begin to ease, the perpetual knot of anxiety that had resided in his stomach slowly unraveling. Replaced by a quiet calm, he began to sleep soundly, dreams no longer plagued by flashing cameras or phantom applause, but by the rhythm of the waves outside his window. One blustery afternoon, he joined Hamish on his fishing boat. The sea was rough, the waves tossing the small vessel like a toy. He felt a primal fear as the boat dipped and swayed, but also an exhilarating sense of being alive, truly present in the moment, far removed from the controlled environment of a concert stage. where every movement was choreographed, every sound amplified Hamish with a lifetime of experience etched into his face, navigated the treacherous waters, with quiet confidence his eyes scanning the horizon, his hands steady on the tiller. He taught Lewis about the currents, about reading the sky for signs of changing, weather, about the rhythm of the ocean and its unpredictable moods. It was a stark lesson in humility and resilience. He realized that life like the sea was unpredictable, and control was an illusion. The best one could do was to learn to navigate, to adapt, to ride the waves, to accept what couldn't be changed, and find strength in the facing of it. As weeks turned into months, a subtle transformation took place. His eyes, once shadowed with weariness, held a new light, a quiet depth, reflecting the vastness of the ocean. He now spent so much time observing his posture, once slightly hunched, as if bearing the weight of the world, seemed straighter, more relaxed, unburdened. He wasn't trying to be anything other than himself. And in that effortless authenticity, he found a profound sense of peace. He began to hum new melodies, simple, heartfelt tunes that emerged organically, not from a desire to create a hit, but from an overflow of genuine emotion. The lyrics were unburdened by commercial pressure, raw and honest, reflecting the quiet beauty and gentle hardships of island life, the profound insights gleaned from unexpected friendships, the subtle shifts in his own heart. He found an old autophone piano in the pub's dusty back room, tucked away behind stacks of forgotten crates. He'd sit there sometimes late at night, when the last patron had left, the only sound the distant murmur of the sea, his fingers tentatively tracing the yellowed keys. The music that emerged wasn't polished or perfect, but it was real. It was his voice, stripped bare of all artifice, singing not for a stadium, but for the silent moon and the crashing waves, a quiet offering from his soul one restless night. The yearning for that unburdened existence solidified into a quiet, unwavering decision. He would disappear, not for dramatic effect or as a cynical publicity stunt, but to simply be no grand announcements, no emotionally charged farewell tour, just a quiet slip away from the relentless, suffocating spotlight. He tasked his bewildered team with handling the inevitable speculation, to simply say he was taking a much-needed indefinite break, a necessary pause from the whirlwind, with a single worn backpack. He shed the designer clothes, the expensive gadgets, every symbol of a life that felt increasingly alien, choosing instead a profound anonymity. His destination was a remote, windswept island, a mere speck on the map where time itself seemed to slow to a crawl, a place as far removed from flashing cameras and screaming fans as he could possibly find. The journey there was long, a series of anonymous flights and forgotten ferry rides, each leg a deliberate step further into blissful obscurity. With every mile he felt a strange, liberating lightness, a sense of shedding layers, as if finally a breath he'd held for years. The air on the island was a revelation, sharp with the scent of salt and rain, a stark, invigorating contrast to the recycled air of arenas and the stale perfume of endless green rooms. His first few days were a blur of nervous energy, an ingrained, almost pathological habit of checking his phone for news, for messages, for the world he'd left behind, a world that suddenly felt distant and unreal. But the signal was weak, almost non-existent, a benevolent curse that slowly forced his hand to stillness. He'd find himself staring at the inert device, not out of longing for connection, but from an almost instinctual need to be reachable, a deep-seated habit formed by years of being constantly on. The silence initially was terrifying. It wasn't the gentle quiet he'd imagined, but a vast echoing void that amplified the noise in his own head, the relentless loop of self-doubt and what-ifs that had plagued him even amidst the loudest applause. He walked the rugged coastline for hours, the waves crashing against ancient stoic rocks, each surge a rhythmic, indifferent reminder of the natural world's profound unconcern for human trivialities, the sheer untamed power of the ocean, magnificent and unburdened by ego, was both profoundly humbling and oddly comforting. Here, amidst the raw elements, he wasn't Louis Capaldi, chart-topping artist. He was simply a man in a heavy coat and a quiet gaze buffeted by the ceaseless wind, just like the ancient stones that bore witness to the sea's eternal dance. He rented a small, unassuming cottage, its windows offering a dramatic, tempestuous view of the churning sea. The furniture was worn, the kitchen impossibly simple, a stark departure from the polished chrome and minimalist designs. He was accustomed to the peeling paint, the creaking floorboards, the faint scent of peat smoke clinging to the air. These imperfections were real, tangible, profoundly grounding in contrast to the curated perfection of his former life. He tried to write picking up his guitar, the instrument that had once been his most trusted confidant. But the melodies felt forced, the lyrics contrived, devoid of the raw, honest emotion that had once flowed so effortlessly. It seemed to have dried up, replaced by a dull, aching creative paralysis. He'd strum a few chords, then stop abruptly, frustrated, the sound hollow and flat in the quiet room. He desperately yearned for the days when music was pure joy, a cathartic, uninhibited release. Now, it felt like a product, a commodity, to be consumed, a realization that choked any nascent creativity before it could truly form. He felt like a well that had run utterly dry, depleted by years of drawing from it, without replenishment, yet solace began to emerge from the most unexpected of places. Mundane tasks, acts of physical labor, that anchored him firmly to the present moment. Chopping firewood, the rhythmic thud of the axe against stubborn logs, a primal satisfying sound. Brewing strong black coffee, the rich earthy aroma filling the small cottage. Tending to a small neglected garden in the cottage's yard, coaxing tentative life from the stubborn windswept soil. These simple physical acts, utterly devoid of expectation or judgment, began incrementally to chip away at the intricate layers of performance he'd built around himself. Each splinter of wood, each weed pulled from the earth, felt like a small, tangible victory against the overwhelming abstract nature of his former life. Slowly, tentatively, he started visiting the small, solitary pub in Island's only village. It was a place where stories were not shouted, but whispered over pints of ale, where faces were weathered not by stage lights, but by years of sea wind and quiet hard living. The conversations were simple, authentic. About the unpredictable, whether the fickle fishing, the small enduring dramas of island life. Miraculously, no one recognized him. Or if they did, they pretended not to, respecting the unspoken code of anonymity. This isolated community inherently offered he was simply the new lad in the Capaldi cottage, a welcome, if initially quiet addition to their tight-knit world. He observed the islanders, their lives and rhythms, intrinsically tied to the relentless tides and the changing seasons, a stark calming contrast. Frantic artificial pace of his previous existence, they moved with a quiet dignity, their very beings shaped by the elements, their faces etched with profound resilience born of generations of quiet fortitude. It was here that he met Hamish, an old fisherman, whose eyes held the quiet vast wisdom of countless sunrises and sunsets at sea. Hamish spoke little, his silence a comforting, grounding presence that required nothing, asked for nothing. They'd sit for hours, sometimes just watching the rain lash against the windows, the wind howling around the eaves of the pub, sometimes discussing the subtle shifts in the tides or the peculiar habits of seabirds. Hamish would puff slowly on his pipe, a plume of fragrant smoke curling lazily into the dim warm light, and offer a quiet nod of understanding when Lewis spoke, or more often, when he simply sat in shared comfortable silence. One blustery evening, Hamish's voice, a low rumble like grinding stones smoothed by the ceaseless tides, spoke of the sea. "She doesn't care about your titles or your fortunes, lad." He rumbled, his gaze fixed on the tempest outside. "She cares about your heart, and your hands you face her. You respect her or she'll swallow you whole, famous or not." These unvarnished words resonated with Lewis with a profound, almost visceral truth. He had spent years chasing external validation, falsely believing that true happiness lay just beyond the next milestone, the next gleaming award. Hamish's simple, unpretentious truth, delivered without pretense or judgment, cut through the clamor of his internal anxieties like a sharp blade. It was a fundamental, life-altering reorientation. He started sketching in a battered notebook he found tucked away in the cottage, not song lyrics, but the rugged, untamed landscapes, the gnarled, strong hands of Hamish, expertly mending a fishing net, the quiet intensity etched on the islanders' faces as they went about their daily lives. He felt a long-forgotten part of himself, stirring the part that simply observed, that felt without the immediate pressure to articulate or monetize, the part that simply created for the sheer, unadulterated joy of creation itself. He remembered his earliest days, playing in small, smoky pubs, writing songs not for an audience of millions, but purely for himself, for the cathartic, raw, unadulterated release of emotion. That fundamental purity had been lost somewhere along the way, buried under the crushing weight of expectation and the relentless demands of a global industry. He thought about the endless interviews, the constant probing into his deepest personal life, the microscopic analysis of every lyric, every fleeting facial expression. It was a relentless invasion, a systematic stripping away of his privacy, that left him feeling utterly exposed and vulnerable. Even while ostensibly celebrated, he had become adept at deflection, using humor as a shield, a quick, witty retort to parry intrusive questions. But the constant performance was exhausting, a draining charade that left him feeling like a hollowed-out version of his true self here on the island. He was simply Lewis, a temporary resident, a quiet observer. He felt the pervasive tension in his shoulders begin to visibly ease, the perpetual constricting knot of anxiety that had resided in his stomach slowly unraveling, replaced by a profound, pervasive calm. He began to sleep soundly, deeply, his dreams no longer plagued by flashing cameras or phantom applause, but by rhythmic, soothing murmur of the waves outside his window. He found an old autochtone piano in the pub's dusty back room, tucked away behind stacks of forgotten crates. He'd sit there sometimes late at night, when the last patron had left, the only sound the distant murmur of the sea, his fingers tentatively tracing the yellowed keys. The music that emerged wasn't polished or perfect, but it was real. It was his voice stripped bare of all artifice, singing not for a stadium, but for the silent moon and the crashing waves, a quiet offering from his soul. As weeks melted into months, the island's rhythm became his own heartbeat, the frantic, almost pathological need to check his phone slowly withered, replaced by a profound, almost luxurious indifference. The silence that had once amplified his inner turmoil now became a comforting presence, a vast open space where new thoughts, untainted by expectation, could finally bloom. His eyes, once shadowed with an almost perpetual weariness, now held a new light, a quiet depth that mirrored the endless expanse of the ocean. He observed daily his posture, which had been subtly hunched, as if bearing the weight of the world, gradually straightened, his shoulders visibly relaxed. Unburdened, he wasn't trying to be anything other than himself. And in that effortless, profound authenticity, he discovered a sense of peace he'd only ever dreamed of. He began to hum new melodies, simple, heartfelt tunes that surfaced organically, not from a desire to craft a chart topper, but from an overflow of genuine emotion, like water from a laundry spring. The lyrics were unburdened by commercial pressure, raw and utterly honest, reflecting the quiet beauty and gentle hardships of island life. The profound insights gleaned from his unexpected friendship with Hamish, the subtle seismic shifts within his own heart. He started filling battered notebooks, not with song ideas for an album, but with fragments of poetry, raw diary entries, capturing the fleeting essence of his journey. He explored themes of solitude, resilience, the arduous search for true connection, and the quiet dignity of a life lived simply far from the madding crowd. He filled pages with observations, with reflections on the ephemeral nature of fame, on the insidious illusion of happiness tied to external validation, on the profound, almost spiritual beauty of ordinary, uncelebrated moments. The island had become his crucible, stripping away the dross, revealing the precious metal beneath. He finally understood that his fame, while overwhelming, had also paradoxically granted him a unique platform. He could choose how to use it, not as a crushing burden, but as an opportunity to share something profoundly meaningful, something authentic, something that spoke to the deeper human experience beyond the superficial glitter of celebrity. His time on the island wasn't merely an escape. It was a profound recalibration. He wasn't running from his life, but running towards a truer, more integrated version of himself. He understood that true happiness wasn't a static destination, but a continuous, often messy process of self-discovery, a courageous willingness to shed old skins, to embrace vulnerability, to acknowledge flaws, and paradoxically, to find immense strength within. The world, as it always does, eventually found him one blustery afternoon. A sleek, utterly out-of-place speedboat cut through the choppy waters towards the tiny island harbor, a stark, gleaming symbol of the life he'd left behind. From it emerged Dave, his manager, looking harried, a storm of worried energy in his expensive suit. The sight of him striding purposefully up the pier sent a jolt of anxiety through Lewis, a ghost of the pressure he thought he'd escaped. Old habits die hard, and for a fleeting moment the knot in his stomach tightened, the familiar weariness threatening to return. They met in the pub. Scent of stale ale and peat smoke, an awkward backdrop to the sharp, unfamiliar tang of corporate urgency. Dave, exasperated, launched into a torrent of news. The record label was furious, the fans were speculating wildly, the media was a feeding frenzy. Lewis listened, truly listened, for the first time in years, not just hearing the words, But sensing the underlying panic, the desperate clinging to a narrative that no longer fit, he saw his own past desperation, reflected in Dave's eyes, a ghost of the hungry, driven artist. He once was Lewis. "What the hell are you doing here?" Dave finally burst out, his voice, a strained whisper, glancing nervously at the few bewildered regulars. "The world thinks you've lost it. We need you back now. The album was massive, the tour was a triumph, you're leaving millions on the table." Lewis surprisingly didn't react with anger or defensiveness. He took a slow sip of his ale, the quiet wisdom of Hamish's words echoing in his mind. "She doesn't care about your titles or your fortunes, lad, she cares about your heart. And your hands." He looked at Dave, really saw him not just as a manager, but as a man caught in the same relentless current. "I was losing myself, Dave," he said, his voice quiet but firm, imbued with the deep resonance of the ocean. "Every show, every interview, every joke, it felt like a performance. I was becoming an echo of what everyone expected, not who I actually was." He spoke of the suffocating pressure, the hollowness, that no amount of fame could fill, the terror of creative paralysis. He spoke of Hamish, the simple acts of chopping wood, the raw power of the sea, the profound peace found in anonymity. Dave, initially incredulous, began to listen, his frantic energy slowly draining away, replaced by a reluctant, almost weary understanding. He had seen artists burn out before, but Lewis was different. There was a quiet conviction in his eyes that was utterly new. "So what now?" Dave asked, his voice softer, resigned. "You just disappear forever?" Lewis shook his head, a faint, genuine smile touching his lips. "No, I'm not disappearing, I'm coming back. But on my terms." He explained his vision. Music that was honest, raw, unburdened by the relentless chase for viral moments or commercial perfection. Music born from this profound solitude, from the lessons learned on this forgotten island. He wouldn't be the same Lewis Capaldi who'd left. He would be a Lewis Capaldi who understood the cost of his own authenticity, a Lewis who now knew the profound difference between performing and truly creating. He told Dave he would sing his truth, not because it was expected, but because he finally understood what that truth was. His voice, once a vessel for heartbreak and humor, now held the resonance of profound self-acceptance, a deep well of experience that enriched every single note. He would choose his moments carefully, engage authentically, and prioritize his well-being above the relentless, often brutal demands of the industry. The journey wasn't over, of course. Life rarely offers neat conclusions, and the path ahead would undoubtedly present new challenges, new pressures. But he had found his compass, a guiding star in the turbulent waters of fame. He had learned that the greatest applause isn't the deafening roar of millions, but the quiet, deep satisfaction of knowing who you are beyond the echo, and the profound peace that comes from living a life aligned with your truest, most vulnerable self. He understood now that the enduring power of his music came not just from his voice, but from the honesty embedded in every lyric, a vulnerability that resonated precisely because it was real. And now that honesty was deeper, richer, imbued with the salt spray of the windswept island, the patient wisdom of an old fisherman, and the deep resonant peace of a soul finally at home with itself. He knew he would face the cameras again, step onto stages, and navigate the whirlwind of public life. But this time he would do it from a place of groundedness, his feet firmly planted, not chasing an external validation that proved ultimately illusory, but simply sharing his truth, one honest song at a time. The island had given profound gift, the gift of himself rediscovered and reclaimed, and that he knew was worth more than all the platinum records in the world. He understood now that true strength lay not in perpetual performance, but in the courage to be vulnerable, to admit when the well was dry, and to step away bravely to refill it. He had faced the silence, grappled with his own thoughts, and emerged with a quiet, powerful understanding of what truly mattered. His music would no longer just be about heartbreak or humor, would carry the echoes of the windswept island, the patient wisdom of an old fisherman, and the deep resonant peace of a soul finally at home with itself. It would be an anthem not just for the heartbroken, but for anyone seeking their own quiet strength in a noisy world. His next chapter wouldn't be a comeback, but an unveiling, the quiet determination in Lewis's eyes, a reflection of the endless, unyielding ocean, slowly began to wear down Dave's corporate skepticism. It wasn't a defiance born of anger, but a resolve forged in solitude, a strength that transcended mere ambition. Dave, accustomed to the frantic pace of the industry, found himself disarmed by this new grounded Lewis. He saw not petulant pop star, but a man who had faced his own personal abyss and returned not unbroken, But profoundly rewired, Lewis spoke not in demands, but in quiet, firm declarations. There would be no immediate media blitz, no desperate chase for headlines. Their return would be deliberate, authentic. And on his terms or not at all, he proposed a phased re-entry, starting with a single carefully chosen interview, where he would speak not from a script, but from the heart, sharing his story with an honesty that would either alienate or resonate. Dave, against his every instinct, agreed, sensing that this was not merely a career decision, but a fundamental realignment of a human being. The first crack in the industry's polished facade came with that interview. Lewis, seated not on a lavish set, but in a simple, sun-drenched room, spoke with a quiet vulnerability that stunned millions. He didn't shy away from the exhaustion, the hollowness, or the overwhelming pressure that had driven him to the brink. But crucially, he framed his retreat not as a breakdown, but as a necessary breakthrough, a journey to rediscover the core of himself. Amidst the noise, he spoke of the island of Hamish, of the profound simplicity of chopping wood, and watching the tides of learning to distinguish between the self he presented and the self he truly was. The interviewer, expecting a tearful confession or a dramatic exposé, was met instead with a serene, almost philosophical reflection on fame, mental health, and the relentless pursuit of external validation. There were no jokes, no deflections, just raw, unflinching truth, delivered with a gentle power that had been entirely absent before. The public's reaction was a wave not of immediate adulation, but of stunned silence, followed by a groundswell of empathetic understanding. The initial confusion and concern gave way to a deeper respect. They saw themselves in his struggle, the universal human yearning for authenticity. In an increasingly performative world, he hadn't just survived. He had transformed, and in doing so offered a quiet roadmap for others. Then came the music, not a grand, commercially calculated album launch, but a single quietly released, accompanied by a simple, unglossy video filmed on the island, showcasing its rugged beauty and the quiet, weathered faces of its inhabitants. The song itself was unlike anything Lewis had released before. Stripped back, primarily acoustic, it hummed with the raw, elemental energy of the ocean and the poignant echo of Hamish's wisdom. The lyrics weren't about a broken heart, but about a soul rediscovering its rhythm, about the courage to step away, about the profound peace found in stillness. It was honest, raw, and deeply resonant, a song that felt less like a product and more like a prayer. It wasn't an immediate chart topper in the way his previous hits had been, but it burrowed its way into the collective consciousness with an unhurried grace, becoming an anthem for quiet resilience for those daring to seek their own truth. This song, born of profound introspection, was the true unveiling. It signaled a shift, not just in his sound, but in his very being. The creative well, once dry, now flowed with an abundance of unburdened emotion, leading to the creation of a new album recorded partly in a makeshift studio on the island, infused with the sounds of the crashing waves and the distant cry of seabirds. The album was a testament to his transformation. Its themes were growth, healing, the beauty of vulnerability, and the quiet dignity of a life lived authentically, far from the madding crowd. Each note, each lyric felt imbued with the salt spray and patient wisdom of his island retreat, a profound distillation of his journey. The ultimate test came with his return to the stage. Instead of a stadium, Lewis chose a series of smaller, more intimate venues, a deliberate choice to foster genuine connection rather than simply chasing scale. The atmosphere was palpably different. Gone was the frantic energy, the pressure to deliver a perfectly curated performance. In its place was a quiet intensity, profound sense of presence. He spoke little between songs, but when he did, his words were imbued with a newfound gravitas, sharing anecdotes from the island, reflections on his struggles, and the unexpected joys of mundane tasks. He connected with the audience not through witty banter, but through shared humanity, through the raw, unfiltered emotion that poured from his voice. His eyes, once shadowed with weariness, now held a deep, quiet light, reflecting the vastness of the ocean. He now spent so much time observing his posture, once slightly hunched, seemed straighter, more relaxed, unburdened by the phantom weight of public expectation. He was still Lewis, unmistakably, but a calmer, more grounded version. His vulnerability, now a source of strength, not a weakness to be hidden. The audience, initially unsure of what to expect, was captivated. They weren't just watching a performer. They were witnessing a profound transformation, a testament to resilience. Tears flowed freely, not just from Lewis's heartbreaking lyrics, but from the shared recognition of what it meant to struggle, to withdraw, and to return with quiet power. His concerts became less about entertainment and more about communion, a collective breath of honesty, in a world often suffocated by artifice. The industry, initially bewildered by his unconventional return, slowly began to grasp the depth of his impact. While his commercial machine might have shifted gears, the cultural resonance of his story was undeniable. He had redefined what success looked like for himself, proving that authenticity, well-being, and a profound personal journey could yield a deeper, more meaningful connection with an audience than any manufactured image. Lewis himself found a renewed joy in creation, a profound satisfaction that transcended chart positions or ticket sales. The pressure still existed, a faint echo of his past, but he now possessed an internal compass, forged in the silence of the island, that guided him. He had learned to set boundaries, to say no, to prioritize his mental and emotional well-being above the relentless demands of the spotlight. He measured success not by external accolades, but by the quiet satisfaction of knowing his music was genuine, that he was living a life aligned with his truest self. His legacy was no longer just that of a witty, self-deprecating pop star who wrote heartbreaking anthems. He was becoming something more profound. An artist who bravely dared to step away from the precipice to heal in solitude, and to return with a message of hope and resilience. He had shown the world that true strength lay not in perpetual performance, but in the courage to be vulnerable, to admit when the well was dry, and to bravely step away to refill it. He had faced the silence, grappled with his own thoughts, and emerged with a quiet, powerful understanding of what truly mattered. His music no longer just spoke of heartbreak or humor. It carried the echoes of the windswept island, the patient wisdom of an old fisherman, and the deep, resonant peace of a soul finally at home with itself. It became an anthem not just for the heartbroken, but for anyone seeking their own quiet strength in a noisy world. His next chapter wasn't a comeback, but an unveiling, a continuous journey of sharing his truth, one honest, soul-stirring song at a time. His voice now imbued with the hard-won wisdom of a quiet island, and a profound internal shift. He knew the path ahead would still present challenges, but he now walked it grounded, his feet firmly planted, no longer chasing an external validation that had proved ultimately illusory, but simply sharing his truth. The island had given him the profound gift of himself rediscovered and reclaimed, and that he knew was worth more than all the platinum records in the world. He was finally Lewis. He was finally Lewis, not the public persona, the quick-witted, self-deprecating pop star, but the truest, most elemental version of himself, forged in the crucible of solitude and the unyielding embrace of the ocean. The island, once a desperate refuge, had become his sacred ground, a silent university where the curriculum was delivered by crashing waves and the quiet wisdom of an old fisherman named Hamish. The lessons learned there transcended melodies and lyrics. They etched themselves onto his very soul, reshaping his understanding of success, happiness, and the profound, often brutal cost of unexamined ambition. What had begun as an urgent, almost desperate flight from the suffocating demands of fame had evolved into an arduous, yet ultimately liberating pilgrimage inward. He had arrived, a hollow echo, a well drained dry by the relentless drawing of public expectation. But he returned not full in the old sense of overflowing accolades, but rather brimming with quiet, powerful self-possession, a reservoir of inner peace that no external pressure could now deplete. The enduring truth that emerged from the silence was disarmingly simple, yet universally profound. Happiness was not found in the roar of millions, nor in the cold gleam of platinum records, but in the unwavering alignment of one's inner world with one's external actions. It was in the feel of earth under his hands, as he tended a small garden, the primal satisfaction of an axe splitting, with the quiet communion over a pint in a dim pub, where his name meant nothing, and his face was just another in a tapestry of weathered lives. This was the reinvention he hadn't known. He needed a radical stripping away all artifice until only the authentic core remained, pulsing with a newfound vitality. The adversity he faced on that isolated speck of land was not the external pressures of the industry, but the internal maelstrom of his own anxieties, the echoes of self-doubt that the silence amplified to an unbearable crescendo. Yet in facing that inner landscape, in allowing himself to simply be without judgment or expectation, he found an unshakable resilience. He never knew he possessed, a quiet courage that allowed him to stand firm amidst the shifting sands of public opinion. He had confronted the fear of irrelevance, the terror of silence, and emerged with the quiet triumph of self-acceptance, a victory far more meaningful than any chart position. His legacy would no longer be solely defined by the anthems of heartbreak he so masterfully crafted, but by the quiet courage of his withdrawal, the profound introspection that allowed him to heal, and the vulnerable authenticity of his return. He had chosen not merely to survive the onslaught of fame, but to transform it, to wield his platform not as a gilded cage, but as a megaphone for a deeper, more resonant truth about mental health, self-care, and the precious, often overlooked beauty of a life lived simply. His story became a powerful testament to the universal human search for meaning beyond the material, a poignant reminder that even in the brightest lights, true clarity often resides in the deepest shadows, requiring a brave turning inward. He had learned that vulnerability was not a weakness to be hidden behind witty deflections, but a wellspring of genuine connection, a bridge to the shared humanity that transcended the artificial divide of celebrity, allowing millions to see their own struggles reflected in his. The Lewis who now stepped onto smaller, more intimate stages was not performing a role, but simply being inviting his audience into the sacred space of his rediscovered self, creating a bond built on shared understanding rather than idolization. The concerts, now less about entertainment and more about shared communion, resonated with an emotional depth that transcended even his earlier wildly popular work, becoming moments of collective catharsis. Each note, each lyric was imbued with the salt-laced wind of the island, the rhythmic pulse of the ocean, and the unpretentious wisdom of Hamish, whose simple declaration: "She doesn't care about your titles or your fortunes, lad. She cares about your heart." And your hand should become his new unwavering compass, guiding his every decision. He carried the quiet dignity of the islanders within him, their lives a living testament to the enduring power of connection to land, sea, and community, a stark contrast to the fleeting glamour he had once chased. He had witnessed a different kind of success, one measured not in chart positions or sold-out stadiums, but in the steadfast rhythm of daily life, the unspoken bonds of belonging, and the profound peace found in simply existing, unburdened by external validation. This understanding permeated his new music, turning his songs into resonant anthems for anyone seeking their own quiet strength in a world increasingly loud and demanding, offering solace and understanding. Where once there was only a catchy tune, his voice, once solely a vessel for heartache and humor, now carried the profound resonance of a soul at peace, a narrative of transformation, woven into every melody, every heartfelt refrain. He had returned to the public eye, yes, but on his own terms, choosing authenticity over expectation, well-being over relentless ambition, carving a path that was uniquely his own. The path ahead would still undoubtedly present new challenges for life. Like the sea was unpredictable, its currents ever-shifting, its storms inevitable. But he was no longer adrift, tossed by every wave of public opinion or industry demand. He possessed an internal compass, forged in the silence of the island, that guided him through the turbulent waters of fame with a quiet, unwavering certainty. He had learned the crucial art of setting boundaries, of saying no, of prioritizing his mental and emotional well-being above the insatiable demands of the spotlight, understanding that his greatest asset was not his voice, but his integrity. His measure of success had irrevocably shifted. It was now the quiet satisfaction of knowing his music was genuine, that he was living a life aligned with his truest self, that he was contributing something real and meaningful to the collective human experience, offering a hand to those who felt similarly lost. His legacy was evolving, moving beyond the witty, self-deprecating pop star who wrote heartbreaking anthems to something far more profound. An artist who bravely dared to step away from the precipice to heal in solitude, and to return with a message of hope, resilience, and the liberating power of vulnerability, inspiring countless others to embark on their own inward journeys. He had shown the world that true strength lay not in perpetual performance, but in the courage to admit when the well was dry, and to bravely step away to refill it, a lesson echoing far beyond the music industry. He had faced the terrifying silence, grappled with his own thoughts, and emerged with a quiet, powerful understanding of what truly mattered beyond the glittering facade, a wisdom earned through profound personal struggle. His music no longer just spoke of heartbreak or humor. It carried the echoes of the windswept island, the patient wisdom of an old fisherman, and the deep resonant peace of a soul, finally at home with itself, transforming his art into a sanctuary for universal truths. It became an anthem not just for the heartbroken, but for anyone seeking their own quiet strength in a noisy world, a melody that whispered of self-acceptance and the profound beauty of shedding, artifice a balm for weary souls. His next chapter wasn't a comeback. It was an unveiling, a continuous journey of sharing his truth, one honest, soul-stirring song at a time, his voice now imbued with the hard-won wisdom of a quiet island, and a profound internal shift, resonating with an authenticity that no marketing campaign could ever replicate. He knew the path ahead would still present challenges for the world. Outside, the island remained loud and demanding, eager to pull him back into its relentless current, but he now walked it grounded, his feet firmly planted, no longer chasing an external validation that had proved ultimately illusory, but simply sharing his truth, living it, embodying it. With every note, every quiet interaction, the island had given him the most profound gift. The gift of himself, rediscovered, reclaimed, and finally truly Lewis whole and at peace, and that he knew with absolute certainty was worth more than all the platinum records in the world, a priceless treasure gleaned from the quiet depths of his own journey, home, a journey that proved true richness lay not in what one acquired, but in who one became. What resonated most with you in this journey of self-discovery? Share your thoughts below, and let's keep the conversation going.